Thank you for joining us for the Adamah and Adam Earthlings Building Food Justice webinar. Today we'll hear short presentations from 4 Earthlings: a food justice activist, a soil scientist, a theologian, and an author. I'll introduce each one of them before they present, and they'll each present for about 7 minutes. Following all the presentations, we'll have time for questions and discussion. So feel free to type any questions or ideas you have into the chat box during the presentations. And my name is Andrew Kong Bartlett. I'll be moderating the webinar. First off will be Amber Burns. I had the great pleasure to work with Amber for a year in 2013 when she served as a food justice pollinator along with 7 other AmeriCorps Vistas we hosted here in Louisville, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. A native to Louisville, Amber is a powerful spoken word artist and is now the Assistant Director of New Roots, which offers a powerful model for affordable access to food and justice. Amber, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. As Andrew said, I am the Assistant Director of New Roots, which is a nonprofit organization that believes that access to fresh food is a basic human right. And we were founded based on this problem in Louisville, that many residents of inner city Louisville did not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and instead had an abundance of fast food and processed food in their neighborhood. The photo that you see on your screen right now is a photo of West Broadway, where there's the longest strip of fast food restaurants in the state of Kentucky. This is located in West Louisville, which is a community made up of about 6 neighborhoods and 80,000 residents. And within those neighborhoods, there are only 4 grocery stores. Whereas on the other part of town in East Louisville, there is a grocery store per 10,000 residents and 27 farmers markets. Now, some of the solutions that were given to address this problem were education. We hear that a lot, that these people in these neighborhoods just need to be educated. They just don't know how to prepare the food, but we're finding that that is not the case. That there's a lot of knowledge embedded in the community. The community simply does not have the resources to access such fresh food. Then we also get the comment that community gardens, why don't these people just grow their own food? And although community gardens can be a very good thing, can add beauty to a neighborhood, most of the time they are not large enough to sustain an entire community of people. And then we have the solution of taxpayer-subsidized grocery stores. I grew up in the Algonquin neighborhood, which is the neighborhood located in West Louisville, and for most of my life there was not a grocery store in that neighborhood. And so my parents were really excited when a grocery store was finally brought to the neighborhood. They were given all types of tax incentives to come into our neighborhood. But unfortunately, the quality of the produce was subpar. And so the photo that you're looking at is a photo that I took when I went to visit that grocery store on behalf of my mother. As you can see, the greens are wilting. They're brown. They're just not appealing to the eye at all. And they were trying to sell these greens at $1.50 a bunch. So I don't like to use the term food desert because it doesn't get at this quality issue that we're finding in neighborhoods that do have these grocery stores and that are given all of this money. And so just dropping a grocery store in the neighborhood is not addressing the problem. So then we had this epiphany. If we look back and start to use old values, utilizing cooperative economics, then we can start to address this problem. It became very clear that the community did not want to be saved from outside forces giving grant dollars and other incentives to come into the community and save them. Instead, they wanted the power and the resources to save themselves. African Americans and other disadvantaged groups have used cooperative economics, have pulled their resources for centuries in order to make it in this country. So if we go back to these core values, then suddenly the answer was clear. And so New Roots was born. Karen Moskowitz, our executive director, moved here. She was recruited from Indiana by this nonprofit called Community Farm Alliance. And they were the first to connect zip code to health disparities and access to fresh food in Kentucky. And so she was recruited to start farmers markets in some of Louisville's food deserts to address this food access issue. But the farmers markets failed, and they failed because the farmers weren't making any money. And they weren't making much money because the community just simply could not afford the retail prices that they had to charge in order to make ends meet. So both parties often left frustrated and empty-handed. So again, we went back to this cooperative economics model, and she found this organization called City Fresh out of Cleveland, Ohio, that were starting fresh stops. And so she learned about that model and adapted to Louisville landscape. So instead of one family trying to purchase all of their food individually from a farmer's market, we found that when we pooled our resources, our food stamps, and our cash on a sliding scale, we suddenly have big buying power. So what was once impossible for one individual family became possible when many families pooled their resources. And then when they began to build relationships with local farmers, food access became a possibility in neighborhoods that once could not sustain a farmer's market or even have a grocery store. So this is a photo of one of our shareholders, Kristen, and one of our farmers, Anwar, at the Fresh Stop. As you can see, all of the food is beautiful. It's fresh. Everything is picked that morning. People have began to call us a fruit and vegetable flash mob and a cross between a family reunion. What makes Fresh Stop so amazing is that they're completely community-owned and driven. So instead of outside forces coming in, telling people what they need to do or telling people what the solution to the problem is, these community members are owning each individual Fresh Stop. So they're the ones that are ordering the food from the farmer. They are becoming SNAP certified. They are opening bank accounts, recruiting other leaders and shareholders to come be part. And they form 6 volunteer teams that work together in order to make the Fresh Stop happen. This is one of our farmers, Andre Barber. Farmers love us. They love that they are now, instead of having to risk everything or all the risk be on them, they know that they have a guaranteed market when they partner with us. So every 2 weeks, when all of the names and all the shareholders put in their orders for their share of the total produce that will be purchased on behalf of the community, the farmers know that they can just come, they drive up with the food, they drop off the food, and then they can get their check and go on farming, or they can stay and hang out with us. They love to hang out now. They sometimes stay behind and sell their meats, but it's guaranteeing them a market, which the farmers love. And this is a photo of one of our families that are involved within the Fresh Stop. In 2014, with only 5 Fresh Stops, we had 650 shareholder and families. We made a $60,000 small farm impact. And in 2015, we plan to by the end of the season, we will have doubled these numbers now that we have 9 Fresh Stops in the state of Kentucky. So what makes our Fresh Stops also so special is that we have a concentration on low resource and minority farmers. Andre, like I said, who's listed in this photo, when he met us 2 years ago, was feeding his food to his hogs because he could not find any distribution channel in Louisville. So in the middle of the season, when our main farmer decided that she no longer wanted to sell to Fresh Stop, and we didn't know what we were going to do, through some mutual friends, we met Andre, and we later found out that he was the first cousin of one of our main leaders, Mary Montgomery, and they had never met. So because of his success with Fresh Stop, it then gave him the confidence to organize other small farmers around him, other African-American farmers, and now they formed the South Central Kentucky Growers. So they themselves have become a cooperative in order to keep up with the growth of the Fresh Stop. This is a photo from one of our newest Fresh Stops, the Parkland Neighborhood Fresh Stop. These are some of our volunteer leaders who come faithfully every other Tuesday. So when you walk into Fresh Stop on Fresh Stop Day, it's set up similar to a farmer's market where every item has its own individual table. And on the table, there's a sign that tells you how much to take of every item. So it'll say take 6 apples, take 2 zucchini, take 6 ears of corn, take 2 bunches of greens. And that will, in the total of that, will equal your share that day. It usually ends up being around 15 pounds of locally grown, mostly organic produce. And we usually order 10 to 12 variety of produce, sometimes including local fresh eggs. So communities love us. They love that they have control over the food that they're eating, and they love that they are able to support minority and low-resource farmers. This is another photo of a Fresh Stop. This is at our Shawnee neighborhood Fresh Stop. These are some beautiful hookeride turnips grown by one of our farmers, Pavel, at Fox Hollow Farms. And this is an example of what a full share would look like. So a family who receives food stamps or who is low income could purchase this amount of food for $12 using their food stamps, or $6 if they are a family on WIC. Because we're not legally allowed to accept WIC in our county, we raised $15,000 to do a matching fund. So families on WIC would give us $6, and we match their $6 to purchase a $12 share. So as you can see, this is a completely community-owned and driven project. We love our Fresh Stops. We think that by the end of the season, we will have connected about 1,200 families to 50 farmers in Kentucky and southern Indiana. And we're utilizing cooperative economics to make this happen. Again, fresh food, we believe, is a basic human right.
Thank you so much, Amber. It's awesome. You've got a great view of what one model for building food access is at the grassroots level, to healthy, affordable food right in people's neighborhoods, run by the neighbors themselves. Now we're going to go deeper underground with Laura Lingneck. Laura directed and taught the Sustainable Agriculture Program at one of my alma maters, Warren Wilson College in North Carolina, until last year. And this year, her book, Resilient Agriculture, Cultivating Food Systems for a Changing Climate, was published by New Society Publishers. The book makes the case for the critical role that sustainable agriculture will play in the coming decades and beyond. The latest science on climate risk, resilience, and climate change adaptation is blended with the personal experiences of farmers and ranchers. Laura is an award-winning soil scientist and has explored food system sustainability and resilience through 30 years of work as a researcher, policymaker, educator, and farmer. And she was the lead author of the USDA report, Climate Change in Agriculture in the U.S., Effects and Adaptation. She is a climate resilience planning consultant and joins us today speaking from the Lenore Rhine Sustainability Studies Center in Asheville, North Carolina. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Andrew. I wanted to spend just the next few minutes trying to make that segue between thinking about food and cooperative economics and getting down to the kind of the fundamental aspects of ecosystems on our Earth that make all of that possible, that make that food, that make us possible. And Andrew, I understand you are controlling the slides?
Yes, we should have your first slide up. Soil is the mother of all things. Can you see it?
Yes, I see it. That's great. So soil has a very special role on our planet. It is a connector. It is the part of the physical nature of our planet in which all the other 4 major components of the planet connect. Those 4 principal materials that make up our Earth is air, water, rock, and life. And it turns out that soil is intimately involved in each of those cycles and connects those cycles. So it's really the connector of all the energy and materials that flow through the Earth, and it's responsible for creating life on Earth. And many very old cultures, Chinese, the Greeks, and many Aboriginal cultures, they understood this at a very deep and intuitive level. Soil is the mother of all things. Long ago, people understood through their own direct experience what we have discovered through modern science, that soils are the foundation of life on Earth. And I want to spend the next few minutes talking about some of the crucial services that soil provides us. And I want to look specifically at kind of the first 4 in that list. Let's move on. Great, thank you. So the first really important role that soils plays is it's a home for plants. It provides, it provides physical support to plants, provides the water and all the nutrients needed by plants. But even more important, the plants are the major source of capture of solar energy. So the energy captured by plants through photosynthesis fuels this planet that we live on, which is a solar-powered planet. And that energy flows through the food web by feeding of plants, animals on plants, and then ultimately the decomposers, the recyclers of the planet, to release that energy and nutrients to go back around through the cycle again. So soils are very basic to the energy that runs this solar-powered planet. So can we move on? Soils have another very important role. They are the regulator of our water supplies. Soils determine how water moves through the landscape. If the soil is healthy, water falling on its surface will be absorbed, and it moves through the soil to be cleaned and to replenish groundwater. But if the soil is not healthy, if it's degraded, if it hasn't been taken care of well, then the water falling on the soil surface runs downhill to the nearest surface water. And the water running downhill carries soil particles and other chemicals and nutrients with it. So when it hits that surface water, it reduces soil water, it pollutes those surface waters. If the water can't move into the soil, another negative effect of poor soil quality is there's less water available to plants growing in the soil. And healthy soil also improves water quality because the soil acts like a giant carbon filter and cleans all the water moving through it. A healthy soil can also store a lot of water for plants to use between rainfalls, and that reduces the need for irrigation. Let's move on. Soil also plays a central role in the carbon cycle, which is connected to global warming and also climate change. And the way that soil acts within this cycle is both by capturing and by releasing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And finally, I want to point out that soil it's the life in soil that makes possible all these different processes that I've discussed, supporting plant growth, regulating water and carbon, recycling waste. Just like any living being, the soil needs food, water, protection from extremes of heat and cold, protection from toxic substances, and I think probably even a little bit of love. It seems that we in our modern society, we've forgotten what earlier cultures more connected to the natural world understood well. Soil is the mother of all things. In the rush to feed ourselves, we've been relentless in our destruction of this living skin of the earth. Pope Francis said in his recent encyclical, and I quote, "The earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air and receive life and refreshment from her waters. I think Pope Francis got it almost right. I would want to add, and let's move on. We've gotten out of sync. I'm sorry about that. So let's move on. So I would want to add that we also receive life and refreshment from her soils as well. Soils are where food begins. Soils connect all life on earth. I think Wendell Berry said it very well. Soil is a healer, a restorer, a resurrector, a connector of lives, the source and the destination of all. He makes the point that we can have no community without proper care of the soil, because we can have no life without proper care of the soil. Science tells us that healthy soils are good for people and the planet. Science also tells us that restoring soils enhances community well-being, reduces global warming, and cultivates climate resilience. The FAO estimates that with the use of sustainable soil management, we could increase global food production by more than 50%, and we can more than double food production in the most degraded parts of the world. We know a lot about how to take good care of our soils. We know enough to begin out to cultivate a more sustainable and resilient future, one that recognizes our deep dependence on the natural world. Let's begin.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Laura. That was great. I learned a lot reviewing the soil science. And so from the soil science, we're going to jump to the theology behind it with Larry Rasmussen, who is a Reinhold Niebuhr Professor of Social Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, New York City. And he is one of the top 3 go-to theologians for all things environmental and agrarian. As a lay theologian with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, his current work in Christian ethics includes analysis of power, the Bible and ethics, and reflections on technology and ecology. His latest book is called Earth Honoring Faith, Religious Ethics in a New Key, published this year by Oxford University. We are honored to have him join us from New Mexico.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning. I've learned a lot from these first 2 presentations and want to transition from them into more kind of macro theological issues. You have a slide in front of you, and I'm going to say a few words of background to that as a transition from the previous presentations. And then we'll talk about this page of graphs and the subsequent one. In 1942, the U.S. Soil Conservation Service distributed a report that was prepared by the chief of the research division, Walter Loudermilk. And what he had done in the late 30s and the 40s was study the Fertile Crescent become the infertile crescent, the Middle East. That report was entitled Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years. So he found similar results in Lebanon, in Israel and Jordan and Syria and Cyprus in North Africa, the Sinai Peninsula. And the similar results were washed off soils, silted canals, meager flora and fauna, and the ruin of dead cities. His conclusion was, now that the soils are gone, all is gone. But the real shocker in that 1942 report of the U.S. Soil Conservation Service is his conclusion, namely that the United States was on the same track. with loss of soils, and at probably even a faster pace. Now, what I want you to see in the slides before us is the following. These are 2 pages of slides from the International Geosphere program, which is a group of scientists, global scientists, putting the trends together in what appear to be disparate areas. So the trends in motor vehicle transportation, the trends in numbers of telephones, the trends in international tourism, the number of McDonald's restaurants, paper consumption, etc. What you see is hockey stick or J-curve trends everywhere. Now the date for each of these is on the left, 1750, the onset of the Industrial Revolution, and they go to 2000. So we don't have data on McDonald's restaurants for 1750. We have them from 1950 onward. So there isn't data for everyone. But there is a screeching acceleration that takes place as of about 1950, and then the date at the end is 2000. The driver for all of the data here, the drivers are the 2 columns, 2 graphs top left. Human population, which quintupled in the last century, and the global economy, or total real economic productivity. Those 2 drive all the rest. The second column is the one I want you to look at here. The damming of rivers from 1900 on, a hockey stick graph. Water use from 1900 on, same screeching acceleration. And fertilizer consumption from 1900 on. These graphs are the graphs of unsustainability. You cannot extend those lines at a sustainable level. And if I had another graph from 2000 to 2015, you would see a continuation of the same. Now, that first page is also the page that shows you unprecedented generation of wealth and goods and services for the human population. So lifetimes are longer than in 1900 by a long shot. A number of people moved into the middle class, especially between 1950 and 1975. But take a look at the second page, the next page of graphs. You see the impact on the planet here. This is where unsustainability enters. The top 3, reading left to right, are greenhouse gases. The second row, ozone depletion, surface temperature rise, floods, impact on ocean ecosystems, etc. Here you have massive negative consequences of the exact same economic activity that produced unprecedented wealth. And it brings us to our present dilemma and also the papal encyclical. What the climate needs in order to achieve anything like what we talked about as climate stability is a contraction of all of these, a contraction in the economic system. What the economic system needs to meet human wants and needs is an expansion. You cannot have both. So we're in search of a new economic model, and we're in search of sustainable agriculture. So those are the slides I wanted you to see. Now let me finish with what I think are the theological issues. One of them is that the religious environmentalism has focused heavily on the negative consequences of the worldview that is back of these slides and back of the whole industrial paradigm. And I'm going to read you just 2 paragraphs from Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist, and these are from 1990. If you put God outside and set God vis-a-vis God's creation, and if you have the idea that you are created in God's image, you will logically and naturally see yourself as outside and against the things around you. And as you aggregate all mind to yourself, you will see the world around you as mindless and therefore not entitled to moral or ethical considerations. The environment will seem to be yours to exploit. Your survival unit will be you and your folks or conspecifics against the environment of other social units, other races, and the brutes and vegetables. If this is your estimate of your relation to nature and you have an advanced technology, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. You will either die of the toxic byproducts of your own hate or simply of overpopulation and overgrazing. The raw materials of the world are finite. If I am right, the whole of our thinking about what we are and what other people are has got to be restructured. Well, it does have to be restructured, and one way to go, and I'll finish with this, is that connector in our title, Adamah. We are earthlings, as all other creatures are, and we are all kin. Martin Luther, who read Hebrew, picked it up right away. Martin Luther's, you may not consider it a compliment, he did. He said we're all clods, but we're the clods who became the cultivators. And the responsibility of clods, earthlings, soil people, becoming cultivators, is to have an intimacy with soil as our own identity. And indigenous peoples understand this very well. Soil is our own nature, and soil is our own destiny. It's a changed worldview.
Okay. Got an echo, but hopefully it'll heal itself. Gosh, that's terrible. Okay. Thank you, Larry. That was honest and brutal at the same time, and we're going to let Fred go next. And I had the pleasure of meeting Fred Bunton at a Kellogg Community Conference. Why was it? Okay. Some years ago, and later got to tour his beautiful homestead and farm in Brevard, North Carolina, in the middle of our agrarian road trip to the U.S. Social Fund back in 2010, when his house was still being built. Since then, he and his family have settled in there, and he has written yet a third book called Soil and Sacrament, a spiritual memoir of food and faith. Fred is the assistant professor of the practice of ecological well-being at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, and he's also the director of the Food, Faith, and Religious Leadership Initiative. Thanks for joining us, Fred.
Muted.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I loved each of your presentations. And I want to pick up right where Larry left off, which is the need for us to foster an intimacy with the soil. And as for those of us who are peoples of faith, that implies a spirituality of the soil, and that's really what I want to talk about. This first slide, for those of us who follow the book of Genesis as an authoritative text, this is kind of our first human vocation. the Lord God formed the Adam from the Adamah, the human from the humus, and then told the Adam to till and keep the Adamah. So tilling and keeping the soil is really our first human job description. And as Pope Francis says, we've done a great job of tilling it, we just haven't kept it. In fact, we've let a good bit of it slide into the sea, especially here in America with our industrial farming practices. We've lost an estimated third of our topsoil in the past 200 years, and topsoil is not a renewable resource. You can build soil through organic practices, but still it's not something we want to be letting slide into the sea. So I set out a few years ago, after having directed a community garden project, I set out to write about this, to write about soil and sacrament. That's the title of my book. And I visited 4 different faith communities who were trying to cultivate an intimacy with the soil. And I want to just focus on one of those and what they did, and we can go to the next slide here. So I lost the screen on my computer, but we should be looking at a group of Trappist monks. Are you there, Andrew? Are we looking at some Trappist monks walking along the path?
Yes, that is.
Great. So so I visited each of my 4 communities I went to in a specific season and coinciding with a liturgical holiday. And so I started my journey in winter in Advent, visiting this Trappist monastery. In the spring, I went to visit a community garden here in western North Carolina, coinciding with Eastertide. In the summer, I visited a Pentecostal farm and ministry, coinciding with Pentecost. And then in the fall, I went to a Jewish farm for the Feast of Sukkot. But so this Trappist monastery, these guys grow mushrooms, oyster mushrooms. And we can go to this next slide here. This is actually taken at my place. I got inspired after visiting these monks who grow mushrooms, and I'm now growing them myself. You're looking at some golden oyster mushrooms here that fruited earlier this summer. And I want to tell you about mycelium, which is really the organism that produces these mushrooms. Mycelium and fungi, the relationship to fungi really goes back 450 million years. And without fungi, there would be no life at all. Only recently have we come to understand the magnitude of our dependence on these organisms. And we know, for instance, now that at least 90% of all plants on Earth form symbiotic relationships with a fungus called mycorrhizae. It's the Greek word for fungus root. And mycorrhizae are ubiquitous. They're found in nearly every ecosystem in the world. And what does this have to do with soil? Well, mycorrhizae are, Laura spoke of soil as a connector. Well, mycorrhizae and mycelium and fungi, they're connectors within a connector. And they really link all these different plant species together, and they also create a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And so really fungi are the organism that breaks down dead material so that other life forms can live. And then this next slide, you'll see a picture of mycelium, of the fungal network. I broke open one of the logs. You can see it's white. That's all the mycelial fungal cells there. And in the background, you can see the oyster mushroom that it produces. Well, why am I telling you all this? I tell you this because in my travels, this was one example of many I learned that became a metaphor for the spiritual life. And for me especially, mycelium and fungi became a metaphor for prayer. And as I hung out with these monks whose lives revolve around work and prayer, they're growing mushrooms and they're praying. That's pretty much a lot of what they do. It occurred to me that this is the kind of these are the kinds of imaginations we need if we're going to face our ecological challenges. We need the kinds of, we need the renewing of our minds that comes with learning about things like mycelium and the life that goes on within the soil. And Laura spoke about a good number of the benefits that come from taking care of the soil, but this is just one example of how our spiritual imaginations, our religious imaginations, can be renewed by learning about the soil and its processes and how much our lives depend on that. And I think it's through that renewal of our imaginations, as our creativity, our capacity for creativity is expanded, I think that's the kind of thing that we need to face our coming ecological crisis. And I will stop there. And actually, let me go to one last slide here, Andrew. And this is the program I direct at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. And for any of you who are interested, we put on a number of continuing education events, again, helping to renew the imagination of faith leaders and learning more about our ecological vocation. So if you're interested in that, the website's there on the page.
Thanks so much, Fred. And we'll probably have to mute you while I talk so not to echo. There we go. So we've gotten perspectives on grassroots organizing for food justice, the need to care for the soil as the mother of life, the need for a new kinship with life to save our species, perhaps, and the renewal of spiritual imagination. While folks are thinking of questions, and you can raise your hand or just type one into the screen there, I wanted to ask one question of all of you, and I know that Amber has to leave for another meeting at 10 of the hour, so I'm going to ask this first of her. Much of what you covered was about bringing about a more just food system here in Louisville, especially in parts of town that are without affordable access to healthy food. But the question I'll ask of all of the presenters is, what must we, as a society, or more specifically in our communities, address to bring about a just food system? Any more thoughts on that, Amber?
Could you ask the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what must we address to bring about a just food system?
I think it starts with listening to the people, or at least in the work that we do, getting the input of community members, getting the answers from them. What problems do they see? How do they think it needs to be solved? And then also asking that of our farmers. And then just figuring out how do we connect the dots between the consumer and those that are growing the food. I think it's the biggest thing. Just listening and checking our egos and pride at the door, and not thinking that we have all of the answers.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks for joining us today if you need to go in the meantime. Yeah, why don't we go back to Laura with that same question, since we kind of limited you to talking about the science of soil. Just kind of looking bigger picture, what do you think that we as a society or more locally in our communities need to address to bring about a just food system, Laura?
I think the first step, or first good step, is just to recognize the benefits of soil, the connection between our well-being and soil well-being. I love a term, Wes Jackson came up with it. He says he wonders if we have the ethical stretch to include nature in our family. And I think in one way or another, all four speakers have addressed that today. And I know I was supposed to be the scientist today, and I did my best to do that. I did sneak in love at one point in my presentation, and I really believe that. So I think, if you do nothing else with what I tried to share, the information I shared today, the next time you eat or the next time you walk out into the natural world, just think for a minute about how soil has played into your well-being in those areas. So, a practical first step, somehow connect with soil. You may not be ready to go out and grow some of your own food, but try to make a relationship with someone who is doing that. And that would be one kind of a first step. I think if you're already at the stage where you are purchasing fresh food from the local food system, then the next step might be to begin to ask questions about the soil care in your area, how the farmers who are feeding you, what they think about soil and how they're taking care of their soil. If you're ready to plunge into growing some food, you can do that even in a pot on a back patio. And there will be some soil there in that pot, and so you can begin to build that relationship that way.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Larry?
Yes, thank you. I was very taken with Amber's presentation on new roots and fresh stop. It was a model that I hadn't seen before, and I'd like to investigate that further because my own attention for years has been to the issue of how we create and sustain just local communities. But I want to say something about the farmers market. That was one of the models, and in a lot of places, it's been a source of good food and support for local farmers, but it hasn't brought wider justice to the larger community. And I want to mention some things that we're doing here in Santa Fe, which has a vigorous farmers market that go beyond what farmers markets in many locales provide, as important as that is. SNAP benefits and the WIC benefits are accepted at the farmers market. There's a school nutrition program, farmers to school nutrition programs, because 60%, Santa Fe is a rich town in most people's perspective, but in some of the schools, 60% of the students live at or below the poverty line, and they will receive breakfast and lunch. But that breakfast and lunch is now connected to the produce from the farmers market when that can be done. I realize that summertime is the big time for harvest and that's school vacation, but nonetheless, there is that connection. There's a table to restaurant program where the good restaurants in Santa Fe buy local produce. The farmers market sponsors a film festival on just food, and thereby carries on an education program, sponsors talks by scientists, including soil scientists and naturalists. So the upshot of it is that the farmers market here is doing those kinds of things, that is creating a vigorous sense of community at the same time that it's providing food that we know where it came from and providing sustenance for farmers who generally here are very small farmers and who most of the time have to do more than farming, have some other outside job. This at least enhances their possibility to continue the lifestyle that they love.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. It's great to hear. Fred, any further thoughts on?
Muted.
Yeah, well, just to add to what my colleagues here have said, I think if we're talking about food justice, talking about how everyone needs access to fresh, healthy, affordable food, I think in connection with this soil seminar, I think sometimes food justice gets pitted against sustainable agriculture, and those things need not be an either or. I think it's a both and I think that's what we're talking about here today. And so I think to really have food justice, to have everyone getting access to healthy produce and healthy food, that food needs to be grown without pesticides and chemicals. It needs to be grown in healthy soil. Healthy soil is going to lead to healthy plants, and healthy plants are going to lead to healthy people. And so I think in as much as we can keep all those webs of connection before us, I think that's the goal. And so what we're really talking about is relationships, and Amber's presentation demonstrated that beautifully, I thought. Just building these kinds of relationships there with her work. And relationship, of course, implies proximity. And so what we're doing in our work at Wake Forest School of Divinity is encouraging churches to move beyond the hunger relief model and to develop relationships, both with farmers and with people who are in need of good, healthy food. So I think the relationships and the proximity are both important.
Sorry about that, I was muted. I have a question from Victoria Binin about how we would address the challenge of sustaining the oceans and the coastal communities. Anyone have a comment, answer around that?
Muted.
If not, I can spend some information that the fisherfolk organization relate to through the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. But anyone have a comment about that? Okay. Next question then from Emma. Wondered if anyone, and perhaps it would have been Amber, but if anyone would like to comment on the rise of chronic diseases as compared to the backdrop, well, just as part of the conversation about statistics that Larry had shown. Any comments about the rise of disease?
Andrew?
Yes, go ahead, Larry.
I didn't really get the question. I'm sorry, it's breaking up here, so I didn't get the question.
The question was whether any of you could comment on the rise of chronic diseases with our current food system.
No.
Muted.
Yeah, I'll just jump quickly in and say they're directly related. I mean, the rise of type 2 diabetes and morbid obesity and immunodisorders, it's directly related to the rise of industrial food. I mean, we've seen everything from a decrease in nutrient density in vegetables. You know, a head of broccoli is not the same head of broccoli it was 30, 40 years ago. It's much more water than nutrients. And, you know, that's just one example among many, but the industrialization of food has led directly to many of the chronic health problems that we're facing today. And I'm sure other panelists can jump in and speak more on that.
No, I think summary. We've only got a few more minutes, and we have a giant question bomb that Dennis Dahlberg dropped. It's, in addition to bottom-up and grassroots efforts, how do we dismantle and transform the power of the oligopolies at the top, and also which are the root of many of these problems. Who'd like to take a stab at that?
I'll take a stab at that one. This is Laura, and I actually struggled a lot with that in the writing of my new book, Resilient Agriculture. How do we change this food system, this industrialized food system that is contributing to major public health issues, environmental issues, and social justice issues? And so, as I understand it, a way forward is to do the grassroots work. That's really important. That's building those relationships on the ground. But we can also work with our government to begin demanding that we stop subsidizing such an unhealthy system and begin to transfer the public monies being used right now to prop up this industrial system to start to build a more resilient, more sustainable and resilient system. And there are lots of good examples for how to do that with public policy, and lots of groups working at that level as well. And as I understand transitions in communities, the way that those happen are both from top down and bottom up. The bottom up is working to make it to realize their vision of their community, and the top down is basically getting out of the way and also providing some support.
Excellent. Larry, any thoughts on that power of the oligopoly?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciated that response on the part of Laura, and would just continue it. I gave a crack at this in a chapter in Earth Honoring Faith, a chapter on how change happens on a mass scale. It's a chapter entitled Change and Imagination, and cites Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives, but the one that is most adaptable to change. I think the moment is a moment when the kind of dynamics that Laura was talking about are coming to pass. And I would have us note the kind of catalyst or the catalytic occasion that the papal encyclical presents. When the People's Climate March happened September 21 in New York City, the police expected maybe 100,000. 400,000 showed up. I've never seen an outpouring on both secular and religious communities over an encyclical like this one brings. Now, and that's directed toward Paris and the global climate talks in Paris. All I'm saying is that I think we're at the cusp of a major movement that will push from below and push hard that those shakers and movers are from above. We'll get lots of pushback too, but it took a million small things to get ourselves into billions of small acts to get ourselves into the trouble that we have. It'll take those billions of small acts, but we've arrived at a kind of a critical mass for things to fall into place in order to make change happen en masse rather quickly.
Great. And Fred, any last word?
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said, Andrew.
Yeah, did you have any thoughts on that question about the power of the oligopolies in the food system and how we address that?
Unmuted.
Yeah, I think both Larry and Laura are right, and I would just reiterate that I think it's a both and of working at the level of policy and holding our leaders accountable, but also this whole climate justice movement and food justice movement is really a grassroots movement, and that therein lies its strength. And I think in as much as we can continue to develop that grassroots work on the ground, that's going to force change at the level of policy and leadership. And we have, the wonderful example of the civil rights movement. It was a grassroots movement that forced change at the top. It wasn't a top-down kind of thing, and I think we're seeing the same thing with the climate movement and the food justice movement. And so I think we need to continue building those mycelial strands of human connection, human and divine connection, I would say, and that's the work before us.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. There we go. Well, thank you all for joining this webinar today. A special thanks to our presenters. It was really beautiful to hear the different perspectives on food justice and ways forward. We had one final comment, which makes for a great closing, and it comes from Steve out in California with the Interfaith Sustainable Food Collaborative. And he says that the week of action on food and World Food Day, October 16 next month, make a great opportunity to bring these conversations to our local congregations. Here in California, we're doing an event recognizing the International Year of Soils, which is this year. So thanks for that comment, Steve. And I do commend to you the World Food Day begins with seed sovereignty, which is the webinar for next month. And that's happening on October 12. I'll send around information with the follow-up email. And I think that's it. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and have a fabulous day, and get your fingers dirty in the soil.